Hey YouTube, welcome to Flock Around and Find Out. Today we're going to be talking about things to do to grow and maintain a healthy lamb crop. Everything from vaccination of the mothers all the way through creep feeding, parasite control, all the way into marketing recommendations and how you're actually going to market those lambs and what age to market them at. All right, so first of all, we're going to talk about what does it take to get a healthy lamb in the first place. And it all starts with a healthy ewe. The dam has to be healthy from the get-go, from breeding through gestation, post-gestation. You have to have healthy ewes. And what does that mean? That means having a mama that is on a good plane of nutrition. She's got a good body condition score. She has to have current vaccinations. We here on the farm basically will do a CD&T, which is a clostridial vaccine, and tetanus. It will prevent them. We try to get it in them basically 6 weeks prior to the lambing date. It protects them, and they pass antibodies on to the baby once the baby is born. We make sure all the ewes are on a tight schedule enough that we know roughly when that 6 week time frame is in order to get that vaccine into them. We also will do hoof trims. We will clip them if they need their hair clipped. Now we do have hair sheep, wool sheep breeds. They do it, it's a little bit different. A lot of them will actually shear them prior to breeding, and then they will actually clean up around the rear end shortly before birthing. We don't do that. We've got hair sheep. They shed for the most part. The ones that are a little more woolly, have a more hairier top line, we will trim them up if needed. Next thing that we have to keep in mind is colostrum. You want to make sure when those babies are born that there is plenty of colostrum available. Make sure they are nursing that mama from the minute that it stands up and starts to nurse. Make sure the mama, strip her udder out, make sure she has colostrum. The importance of vaccinating that mama 6 weeks prior to lambing is she passes those antibodies on in the colostrum. That colostrum is super important, probably the most important thing that we have available as far as making a healthy lamb. In case you have a problem and your ewe does not have milk, or she doesn't have adequate colostrum for her babies, be sure to have colostrum replacer on hand. There's all kinds of brands out there. Just make sure you have some that you can give that baby, because that is a definite, you have to have that as a plan B just in case that mother does not have milk. So the next thing related to the ewes and having a healthy mama is the nutrition plane of that ewe. If you have a thin ewe going into it and she has a baby and she's already thin, she's not going to be able to support milk enough, making milk enough to support life in that baby. So we typically have to, depending on when you lamb, and if you have plenty of pasture, plenty of grass, you may not have to supplement as much, but we have to supplement in the winter months because our grass dies off. We don't have enough for them to graze and sustain, especially this year because we had a drought going into the fall. But basically that last 6 weeks, even down to a month prior to lambing, you have to start adding in a little bit of supplemental nutrition to these ewes. Increase that nutrition plane because they're starting to make milk right there in that last month of gestation. And you've got to be able to have them healthy enough with enough flesh on their body to continue making milk through lambing and supporting that lamb until weaning time. So increasing that nutrition plane, if that means feeding, protein tubs, grain, if you've got crops that have been cut that you can actually graze them over those cut crops, great. Anything to increase that nutrition plane. So on a similar note with the ewes, what we do is you want to separate these ewes out, if you can, into pastures by age groups. Some people do age groups. Some people will actually sort them by if they have singles or twins or triplets. They'll actually put similar groups together. You have less competition for feed. That supplemental feed we're talking about, if those ewes are a similar age, if they are all first-time mamas, you put them in a pasture together. Hierarchy-wise, them pushing each other out of the way for feed, similar aged animals do not tend to do that as bad. If you put in a 4-year-old ewe with a bunch of, or several older ewes with a bunch of younger ewes, first-time mamas, they're going to be pushed off of the feed. Those older ewes are going to be the ones more than likely getting all of that supplemental nutrition, and that's going to leave the younger ones to fend for themselves, and they tend to drop weight and they're not able to grow as healthy of a lamb. So try to sort them by age if you can. If you have a way to have them ultrasounded to know if you're expecting singles or if you're expecting twins or triplets, you can also use that to group them as well. Some places you don't have that luxury. If you do, separating them by age is definitely important. So this is one of our pens that we've separated with the babies. We don't have the ability to separate as many detailed forms as we should, so we have twins and singles and triplets all kind of in the pasture together, but we do separate the ewes for the most part by age. This group here, these are all more mature ewes. They have had babies before. They tend to have a good hierarchy balance. They get along with each other. We're not too far off from weaning this group, but they tend to be holding their condition very well because they are similarly sized and age matched. This is another pasture that we have. This pasture we have separated out mostly first-time mamas, and we've got a couple that had twins that were kind of on the low on the hierarchy in the other pasture, so we pulled them out into this pen too, just so they had more access to feed and grain and weren't pushed off of it as much. As you can tell, there's not a lot of grass, so we are having to supplemental feed quite a bit this year. So now we're going to start transitioning more into the lamb's health and sustaining that healthy lamb itself. We've talked about the ewes. The first thing that I'm going to talk about that kind of ties into the ewe's nutrition is the lamb's nutrition. Of course, they're all going to be nursing. They're all going to be on the mama right now during this time, but we do start supplementing in creep feed. That creep feed just kind of helps get those lambs started eating on their own. We put it in from day one. Most of these lambs, they'll start picking at it that first week of life. They'll actually go in there and they'll be interested. They may not eat a lot of it, but they'll start kind of nosing around in it, eating some of that grain. The neat thing about ruminants is they don't have an actual function in rumen until they are older. So this creep feed just kind of helps speed up that process, starts putting those bugs into that rumen, starts getting that rumen to where it is digesting like it's supposed to sooner. And of course, our goal, everybody's goal on raising lambs is to grow a heavy, well-muscled lamb, and one of the quickest ways to do that is to start putting some creep feed in there. So I'm going to show a couple examples of creep feeders. We kind of have rigged up a cattle creep feeder, and I've got a gate. The gate's off of it right now. Basically, it has slats just wide enough that these lambs can go through. Basically, they will go in here, and there's a trough that feed will stay in, and you can fill it up from the top here, put your grain in, and they basically are able to access feed and grain at any point that they need it or want to eat it. The other thing about this creep feed, what we do is actually add in some soybean meal. It will increase that protein content. We add a little bit of fat. That just helps them grow a little faster. It helps them with the transition onto adult feed. So if you don't want to spend a whole bunch of money and buy a creep feeder, they sell these creep feeder gates, and Premier One is where we got this one. You basically have a bar here that you can adjust the height, and then you've got these vertical slats that adjust the width and only allows a lamb that size to go into there. What that does is prevents the bigger ewes, the older ewes, from coming in and eating all of the food. This option is a little bit cheaper of an option. What we did is basically took a wood panel and took a part of our lean-to of our barn, put a little trough in here. It's covered because of the lean-to, and we just set this gate up here, connected it with some U-bolts to a T-post, and we've got a secondary creep gate, little creep feeding area. And like I said, this is a cheap and easy way to have a creep feeder if you don't want to buy one of the big metal commercial style creep feeders. This is an example of the feed that we put into this creep feeder. It's more of a coarse material feed. It's not pelletized. These lambs have a little bit easier time eating this. It's a little more palatable for them. This has got some distiller's grains. It's got a little corn mixed in, but that corn's cracked corn, so they have less trouble chewing that and crunching it up. But we work closely with the feed mill, and they have a nutritionist on hand that formulates this for us. Like I said, for our creep feeders, we do add in just a little bit more soybean meal to raise that protein content. So next we're going to be talking about parasite control. And this is a huge topic. We're not going to cover all the details of parasites and parasite preventatives and parasite treatments. We're basically talking about parasite control in the regards of growing a healthy lamb. What that means for us is our biggest thing from the age of 0 days, so at birth, to weaning time, the biggest thing that most producers are going to run into is going to be coccidia. Coccidia is basically a parasite that causes profuse watery diarrhea in lambs. There's not a lot of good approved treatments for coccidia, but there are some really good preventative measures that you can take. One of those things is something called decox. It is a substance that we actually can add into the feed. You can add it into mineral. It will actually help prevent the coccidia from growing and reproducing in that rumen and turning, or in the gut of that lamb. So there's other parasites that can affect them. Barber pole worms is probably the big one. You basically have to still follow good environmental management practices to help maintain that. What that means is keeping these little lambs in a dry environment, keeping them somewhere where there's not a lot of mud and feces. If you can keep them from eating out of troughs that they have walked in, if you can keep them from pooping where they actually eat, you're going to cut down tremendously on that worm or that parasite burden. This time of year in the winter time, it is a little harder to maintain or keep mud away, but you have to be creative. If you've got a dry lot somewhere, if you're having lambs that are having trouble with coccidia, separate them off into a dry area, treat them, keep them from spreading that coccidia to the rest of the healthy lambs if you can. So raise your feeding troughs up, get them off the ground so those lambs can't jump in it, poop in the trough where the other lambs are coming along and eating, and try to keep their environment as dry as possible. So if you do have a problem with coccidia in your herd, in your lambs, obviously contact your vet. There are treatments for coccidia. A lot of those are going to be location dependent. It depends on you, your management practices, your herd, as far as what the best treatment is. For the most part, management and the preventative measures like the decox, that's going to do 80% of the work if you do that correctly and in the right timing. Next, we have to think about the age that you're wanting to wean your lambs. We tend to wean ours between 60 and 90 days. Some of that depends on the weight that they have hit. We kind of have a target weight. If they hit 60 pounds and they are pulling the mama down and she's got twins and both twins weigh 60 pounds, we're going to try to wean them at that 60 pound range. If they are 2 months old and they're 60 pounds, we're definitely weaning those. If they're 60 pounds and they're a single, the mama's holding her condition good, we're going to wait closer to that 90-day mark to wean them. It really just depends for us, but roughly 2 to 3 months is the time frame that we try to wean. Now, what that means is very breed specific. You know, these hair sheep, these white Dorpers that we have, they put on muscle fast. You know, they're going to be 75 pounds at 3 months of age, where you've got other breeds, black bellies, Katahdins, they grow a little bit slower. They may not hit that weight mark for you. So it's really going to depend on what your goals are for your farm, for your program. But most sheep, most lambs, they're going to be old enough, they're going to have a functioning rumen by 60 days. So if that size meets what you're needing for your program, you should be good anytime after 60 days to wean them. One common thing that I hear a lot of times is, I'm going to only wean my ram lambs and I'm going to leave the ewe lambs in with the mamas and just let the mamas wean them as they dry up. There's a couple problems that you can see by doing that. The big one is that ewe lamb's still going to be nursing that mama, and she is likely to pull that mama down further, and it's going to kind of keep her, it's going to slow down her ability to put on flesh enough to rebreed. You know, we try to rebreed ours because they're hair sheep every 8 months. You know, if they are lambing every 8 months for us, that's ideal. So if they are being drawn down or pulled down from a ewe lamb because you didn't want to wean it, that's going to slow down that lambing interval. Another thing is when we wean, so we're separating both the ram lambs out and the ewe lambs out. I would also recommend separating them amongst themselves. Separate the rams from the ewe lambs, because the last thing you want is, as these lambs start to mature, you don't want the brothers breeding the sisters. So separate your lambs into groups away from the mamas. And we kind of do a fence line weaning. So we try to leave the lambs in the pasture that they were in when they were on the mama. We pull the mamas to a new pasture. There seems to be a little less stress, a little less of a lag time in them eating. They tend to keep the same habits and grow better by doing that. If you pull these lambs out and they go into a pasture they have never been in their entire life, they're screaming their heads off, they're trying to run through your fences, they're getting caught up in wire. It's just a whole lot more stressful for them, and they do tend to do a little bit better by staying in the pasture that they were in and pulling the mamas away from that pasture. So the last thing we're going to talk about and discuss is market considerations. What your goal is with these lambs. Are you keeping them? Are you growing your herd? Are you selling them as breeding animals? Are you selling them for meat? You know, have in mind what your goal is going to be. For us, we keep them as replacement animals. We basically keep some of them each time we lamb as replacement ewes. We sell a vast majority of our ewe lambs, and we sell all of the ram lambs. All of these animals, for the most part, are going to be breeding stock. Some programs will basically breed, keep the best ewes, and keep them to grow babies for meat. Most of ours are pretty much registered stock, so we don't do that. If you're wanting to go the meat route, you know, get an idea for your area what your market is. If that is 75 to 90 pound lambs at market, if that's bringing the best price, then that's your target goal. You only keep those animals until they're about that weight and then take them to market. It's been running around for restaurant quality meat. It has been being about a 90 pound to 100 pound lamb. You know, those restaurants want to pay a premium and get the most meat that they can get each time. We've seen fluctuations in that at sale barns, on markets, where you'll actually have a 50 to 70 pound lamb fetch the highest premium. So just check your market before you start lambing, before you get into this. Get an idea of what your goal is before it sneaks up on you. So to conclude this video, we basically have talked about everything that it takes to grow and maintain a healthy lamb. If you have any questions, I just skimmed the surface. If you have any questions, post in the comments. There's a lot of details in each subject that we have talked about, especially in the parasite subject. I know I've just skimmed the surface here. There'll be some more videos in detail on all of these subject areas in the future. Stay tuned. I really appreciate y'all tuning in, watching our videos. If you like this comment, please go down, help us out, hit the subscribe button. Every time you subscribe, that helps our channel grow. And give us a thumbs up if you would. Thanks for watching, guys.